Okay, so today I'll test another one of these mobile streams on the Starlink, and so it had been working good for the first couple of sessions, and then yesterday it was completely crapping out. So again, on sort of the same route, same circumstance, everything. So I won't even try to do an episode of that Absolutist philosophy. We're up to episode 3, but I'll just wait because this has been fucking up so much. So what I have here, though, is I'll still discuss a similar concept here to the idea that let's think about, like, why does somebody do something extreme in society, right, that doesn't abide by its morals or principles, right? Let's look at that, like a criminal or any sort of deviant behavior, right? What is the psychology behind that? And the problem with the perception of it is, how would society perceive that? Well, we would perceive it as a false absolute. Like, well, morality is absolute and it's inherent and it's objective. So how could anyone possibly do something that doesn't align with it, right? Or we try to dehumanize people like that. Like, oh, anyone, this is the absolute standard, right? And anybody who doesn't abide by it, well, the standard is still absolute, but you just aren't human then, or we're going to label you and try to dehumanize you, instead of realizing, oh no, it's very human to do all the things that we would condemn, because throughout human history, that's exactly, we try to make it like some separate category, but no, it's absolutely human. That's why we have laws. That's why we have to, stigmatize it. So neither is it inhuman to do those things that we condemn, nor is it absolute, our morality and our, what we want to be the case. Like, let me try to say that a little more like a logical razor. All of the things we condemn and consider immoral are absolutely human to do. They're not inhuman at all, because we've seen throughout human history, this is exactly what human nature and tendency would do, right? All the things we condemn, and that's in part why we condemn it. And our morality and our contrivance response to those tendencies is not absolute. Because if it was absolute, then thered be no question, right? Those things would never happen. So it's one thing on a functional basis to say, well, that's why we have laws and that's why we have courts and so forth. Right? That can be a useful way to enforce those subjective morals that we have. But there's two problems with that, treating it as an absolute or unquestionable, although it may alleviate the cognitive dissonance associated with questioning it. Number one, those same laws that we take for granted as absolute, or the morals, can be twisted very easily. Like, for example, at one point slavery was enforced and upheld by the law, in the sense that, obviously hundreds of years ago in various parts of the world still, Dubai, right, slavery is there. The point is, it would be either supported by the law or trying to prevent it, trying to free people would have been against the law. So what does that tell you, right? It means that as much as we might take these things for granted as absolute, they can easily be twisted and distorted and misused, right? So that should be held actively accountable more, and you shouldn't just blindly take it for granted. Right, like I have this logical razor. I always said that which you consider as a default, right, that which you take most for granted and treat as a default, is that which you are most controlled by. Now, that still doesn't mean that it's, that it's necessarily a bad thing, but it means, like, in every era of human history, the things that people take most for granted are the ones that they're actually being controlled by, right? Everything else they'd question, like, oh, I don't know about this, or I don't want to buy this product. If you think people are trying to sell you something, or you think people are trying to get you. But the thing that you take most for granted isn't that because it's good, but because you just don't think about it, right? You let it bypass your critical thinking, like, oh, that's like God or religion or certain things like that. Like in the modern era, let's try to define that, what I call the machination process, the net sum of technology in the era. So you have like an advanced level of bread and circuses, like I call it folly favoritism, which is actually what the last episode was about. So the thing is that, you know, you have so much distraction, you have so much overcompensation. None of that actually qualifies the contrivance state that you're in. But what it means is that you're in a position to basically, you know, be controlled by technology. And that is like the modern God in a way, is technology, because everything is answered by that. If you have any, you know, cognitive dissonance or thoughts, oh, you got to distract yourself with technology, entertainment, escapism. Or, oh, if you have any life goals, oh, to get more technology, more whatever, make you know, it's like what I call the reaction relief sort of a dynamic, right? The reaction relief dynamic, which means it's not so much a meaning of life, but in the absence of a meaning of life that you have that doesn't qualify a contrivance state, which is why meaning would be required in the first place. But it becomes all about, let's take, this is actually, think about it, all of human progress has done what? Right? What has it done besides it's zero-sum self-interest? It's trying to maybe make people live as long as possible, or make the ability to survive as easy as possible, as convenient as possible, and maybe even overcompensate and as pleasurable as possible. So what you'll notice about all of those dynamics, right, all of human progress and technology, right, and achievement leads to simply that. None of that is actually a reason for doing it, or a sort of, you're just taking the same zero-sum, again, self-preservation or zero-sum sustenance, and just making it easier, more convenient, and maybe more pleasurable. So rather, what this does is it doesn't answer any existential questions, but rather what it does is it removes the desire or the need to ask them in the first place, right? So this was a key, this was a major discussion that went on for a long time, actually, but this is how it basically culminated, was that I basically concluded that it was, again, everything people have done in their progress is nothing more than zero-sum self-sustenance, zero-sum self-interest preservation. Now, you might treat that with a negative framing, but it's not about it being negative. It's about, think about all of, you know, we would glorify it, right? Human beings are so smart, and we've come up with so much amazing technology and achievement and progress. That may be true, but all of that is nothing more than zero-sum. What does it do, right? Does it have some grander, greater meaning to it? Is there some higher measure, higher power at work? Or is it merely, oh, we take these same things that we have, these same needs that we have, and now, despite how elaborate we might make it, oh, we make the best kind of food, it's the healthiest, it helps us live longer, but it's still a zero-sum process. Or it tastes better, so it overcompensates, it's hedonistic. Or, oh, it's easier, convenient to get it, to supply, variety, you know, the ease of access, things like that. So what that tells you is, again, does any of that human progress in the modern era, right, by today's standards, we'll point to our technology, oh, but we have all this comfort, overcompensation, etc. Does any of that actually answer any existential question or give any purpose? Or is it simply, oh, we're taking the same zero-sum needs that we have, and we're not answering any question. We're simply removing the desire to ask by overcompensating with the convenience. So like, oh, we don't have to question why we're doing it because it's so easy to do it, right? Or we're distracting ourselves with entertainment and escapism from questioning doing it. And we're also overcompensating with hedonism and what I call false meaning in means is my expression here. False meaning in means, which means like it's just zero-sum sustenance. It's just zero-sum means. It's something you don't have. It's something you don't choose, right? It's something you just have to do. Like you have to eat, you have to drink, you have to do a certain amount, right? So you're able to people find false meaning in that, even though it's a zero-sum process. Right, so you use that as sort of a placeholder. So again, nowhere is any value actually being posed above a zero-sum process, but this is the degree of, again, you're reacting to things you didn't choose that you have to do. You're relieving certain things, like I always say, right, like, oh, you love something, but it's only a reaction to something else negative, right? Like, it seems positive. So if you're in the desert, then, oh, water seems better, the treetop fruit ideation effect that I talked about before. But no, it's like, you know, you're in a cold area, so you like the heat, or you want like clothing or something like that, or you're in a hot area, so you want something cool. So in other words, you're simply reacting to the circumstances around you. So do you genuinely want or like those things, or are they only valuable in contrast and reaction to this other state that you happen to be in? So if you were in a completely neutral state and you were completely at peace, now those things wouldn't have any special value, because again, their value comes from a reactive state, not from an inherent standard. And so now, what you also realize from this is the simple fact that, let's get back to the other point, which is the fact that again, everything is zero sum, so this is a key element here. The key element is the fact that, again, you're not answering any question, you're simply removing the desire or the need to ask, because again, you're making it easier to perform these things that you didn't choose. So you say, you know, you would say, okay, people didn't choose to be born. They don't choose to have to eat and drink. They don't choose the kind of society that they're born in. They don't choose the contrivance state. They don't choose how they look. They don't choose their race, their gender, their, you know, anything, right? So now, rather than what I call self-actualizing from an inherent base state and saying, okay, I don't choose those things, so I'm going to now, which would be framed in false duality, like, oh, you're rejecting them, or you're against them, or you hate them, or you're negative. It's not about that. It's that you didn't choose them, so now let's neutralize that, let's equalize that, right? It is what it is, but now let's try to define and choose what you want or what you value from an inherent standpoint, meaning like you don't do it just because you're there, like, oh, you happen to be born this way, or you happen to be in a certain state, so therefore you just reinforce the state and you take pride in it. Sort of what I call the indignant insistence. So if you were born in a different circumstance, you would glorify that one too, rather than insisting upon that and using your ego as a placeholder for value, right? Ego and self-insistence. You would say, okay, let's equalize all of it. It doesn't matter. And now I'm going to define, why do I value this, or what do I value, based on a standard. Not based on the self, not based on a reaction, not based on something that you didn't choose, based on a neutral, objective, inherent standard that you can still define for yourself, right? You can define what that standard is, but it has to be consistent, it has to be measurable, it has to be, again, defined and held accountable. And so what you have now is, again, we can get back to the point of modern society and technology and all of this overcompensation does not answer anything. It's still a zero-sum process. It doesn't answer anything. But what it does is it removes the need to ask, right, or the desire to ask any existential questions or hold that purpose accountable. Because, if it was more of a struggle, or if it was more of a process to do these zero-sum non-choice reactions, like, again, survival, then you may be more likely to question it and less likely to tolerate a subversive contrivance state. But because it's so easy and convenient, now it's like, oh, you don't even have to think about it because it's so easy, right? Or because everything is, again, so much within access, so it doesn't answer any question as to why you're doing it, or the nature of the process. It's just, oh, now you don't have to think about it because it's so convenient, it's so easy. And you don't have to seek any sort of value or meaning. You just, oh, I'm going to overcompensate by, oh, this food that you didn't choose to eat, that you maybe struggled to get, is going to taste better now, or it's easier to get now. So again, you either overcompensate with hedonism for non-choice reaction, you find false meaning in means, the means to sustain existence, you find false meaning in that, instead of, oh, it's a zero-sum process. And so, again, reaction and relief, it removes the desire or the need to ask a question, existential questions, or any sort of qualification for value or meaning, and instead it becomes completely reactive in the sense that rather than treating it as a zero-sum process, you treat that as actually a basis of value. So again, what would be the idealized end goal of that process by human society? Let's make everything as easy as possible, as convenient as possible, as pleasurable as possible, so that a zero-sum existence doesn't need to be questioned, because we're going to constantly distract ourselves, we're going to constantly have everything so easily, conveniently at our fingertips. There's almost a resentment for that, right? This is what it shows through technology. Technology and human progress shows a resentment for those non-choice reactions, like, oh, we didn't choose to be born, we didn't choose to have to eat, we didn't choose to have all these needs and limits and reactions, so we sort of resent that, and technology says, okay, we're gonna take that thing we didn't choose and make it as easy as possible and remove the need for any effort to achieve it. So again, imagine that state in the future. Okay, a state where you eat a pill every morning, or you eat a pill once a year, once a lifetime, and you no longer have to eat food, right? So again, you're born and you eat one pill and it lasts your whole life. You never have to eat again, you never have to drink again. So you remove the need to do those things that you didn't choose to have to do. So now what is left? Right? You can no longer find false meaning and means of, oh, the food tastes so good, or, oh, I like this kind of food, or I like this kind of thing, because all those reactions are off the table. I guess you could say you could theoretically do it anyway, like you'll eat food because it tastes good, not because you need to eat it anymore. Or pretend that was a trade-off. If you could eat a pill once when you're young, like let's say 5 years old, and you get to choose now for the rest of your life, you never have to eat again, you never have to drink again, right? Your needs are completely fulfilled, right? You have no need to eat, no need to drink ever again. But if you do those things, you can still do them, but if you do them, then you don't enjoy them. You don't get any flavor, you don't get any taste, you don't get any satisfaction from doing it. Right? So now you take away the hedonism, you satisfy the need. So now there's no value in that process. So now what value do you find? Right? If you, again, hedonism or see a lot of things that are taken for granted and treated as like, oh, that's so obvious, like duh. It's actually kind of the opposite, because it's something that it's not so much that it's obvious, it's that the contrived way that society treats it is necessary to sustain a controlled state. So it's more like if you did think about it, it would invalidate the specific application that society wants you to do with it. But it's not so much that, oh, it's so obvious, it's that you can't think about it freely. Right? You're not able to do that, otherwise you would question it or not limit it. So right, like what basis of value would there be? Okay, so all your needs are met. You have this one pill one time. You never have to eat again. You never have to drink again. So then what? Right, you don't have to work and struggle to achieve some zero-sum means. It's already fine. You don't have to distract yourself or overcompensate for work and the cognitive dissonance of contrivance because it's no longer necessary. Right, you don't even have to do those things in the first place. So it's a reaction, right? The value only comes, like, would you value those things if you didn't react if you didn't have to, like, let's say you didn't work, you didn't have to work, right? You just have infinite money. Would you now? You might think, oh, now you'll spend all day doing entertainment and escapism. It's possible that you might still enjoy that, but a lot of the value of stuff like that comes reactively from you're distracting yourself from your day or from reacting to it or overcompensating for it. So if you're in a perfectly balanced, at peace state, you might question those things, or you might kind of deconstruct it to, like, what's the point? Why am I doing this? What am I distracting myself from? Why do I have to distract myself? It almost becomes like a sensory overload type of thing. Or you would do it so much, then you start to, it's like if you've seen every movie in existence, you've seen it all before, so you become sort of jaded to it, or what people would call desensitized. But is it really desensitized, or is it simply being aware of the nature of the process so it no longer affects you? Because, of course, everything is a process, so you're either controlled by it or in control of it, and so, or aware of it, at least, to counteract it. You could call it desensitized, you could call it high standards. So all of that, you realize, okay, everything is nothing more than a process. So now you, again, from this inherent base state, you would say, not that it's negative, but it's nothing special. It just is what it is. You can do anything in your imagination, right? You can do the same thing. So this is the initial minded state that I talk about, where, think about it this way. Anything anybody could do in fiction or creativity, or anything anybody could say, right, all human expression and the collective human consciousness could be done by you, right? Like it was done by the human mind. So anything that you could do, that anyone else could do, you could do too. So every movie in existence, every story in existence, every idea in existence, you could consider it the same as anybody else. Forget about dressing it up, marketing it as a product, or anything like that. Your mind is capable of objective, infinite thought. So anybody, so it's almost more the art of limiting or marketing those things than it is the simple idea of having them, right? You could think yourself, right, sort of specifying and putting a name to it. You could think yourself any of those things that anyone else can do, right? Again, thought is objective. So to limit and restrict and structure and specify is very, is very myopic. We try to, again, the initial mindedness to seek value from externality, in the sense that we require something, value from externality, like the same thing that we can think ourselves or do ourselves or say ourselves is given special value because, oh, look, somebody else does it, or, oh, look, we see a package together in a movie, in a product, in a thing. You could think that same exact thing. You could imagine that same exact thing, but because we experience it in externality, or it's more like your mind is reduced to a reactive state, like, so you don't think freely, and so you define everything by externality value, like that. Like, you react to what is around you and what you're exposed to. So rather than, oh, you could just think that same thing yourself, or anything yourself, you don't think and you react. So everything has to be on a surface level, right? Everything has to be what is directly in front of you with your five senses. That is what you value. That is what is real. That is what exists. That is absolute. Instead of, again, the infinite objective mind that's not limited to those things. They can't be controlled. They can't necessarily even be understood or predicted in others. Like, so to reduce everything to that initial state where it's externality defined, that's what you understand, is that then you're controlled by it, you're limited to it, you're defined by it. Right, this sort of absolute value and externality. that it has to be, I had a better way of explaining it, but I can't quite remember it. But like how credible or at peace is your state of being that you need constant reinforcement through externality, that you need to, like for example, if you're at peace with yourself and your life and your contrived state and everything, you wouldn't care about externality. You wouldn't care about other people. You wouldn't care about you wouldn't need anything, right? You wouldn't need any reinforcement. You'd just be at peace. That you would see other people, but you wouldn't care. You wouldn't need to judge them. You wouldn't need something from them, reinforcement. You wouldn't need negative or positive reinforcement, right? You wouldn't need to, you wouldn't need to judge them and think less of them or feel better about yourself by negatively judging others. Or you wouldn't need some positive reinforcement like, you need them to give you some positive uplifting, right? You wouldn't need any of that if you were in a peace state. So this is where contrivance takes on an imbalance. Like, yes, your contrivance state is absolute, but that it requires constant reinforcement through externality. You have to constantly negatively view things that don't reinforce your worldview or the state that you're in. You need constant positive reinforcement, overcompensation of it. So by that logic, it's arbitrary, and that could apply to anything then. Let's create this state that's supposedly absolute or sound and value, but then it requires constant contrivance, constant reinforcement, constant censoring of reality, constant overcompensation, constant distraction, constant, again, social contrivance, reinforcement, overcompensation. So clearly, it's not absolute, because then by that logic, it could be, you could do that with just about everything, so it doesn't justify or rationalize the specific contrivance state present there. So I'm going to try to upload these on almost like a daily basis, but I don't typically do that. I'm usually like weeks behind with what I do. It kind of amazes me how much material I went through in that format, but this is kind of what, so what I'm going to do is basically just revisit it, rehash it. It's very hard to do because whether I'm doing it from memory or just these are things that I've discussed and thought about, it's hard to get it in a way that people will understand it, because part of the point of it is kind of expressing exactly that, is that, if you dump something down to a lowest common denominator, then it defeats the whole purpose. So if I did that, if I explain it, then it kind of defeats the whole, right, it's hard to explain. Like, you have to dumb it down so people understand it, but then that defeats the purpose of what you were saying in the first place. So it's the sort of thing, I have an expression like, the fact that you would have to explain something means that people either don't want to believe it, right, and I say you cannot dissuade with reason what came about by desire, or they're not capable to understand it, or if they were, they already would. So you're not really doing anything, because either they're capable to understand it, but they choose not to, they don't want to, or they just don't have that capacity, they're not capable. So, right, the fact that you would have to explain it is pointless, because they either just don't get it, or they wouldn't understand it, or they don't have the capacity, they don't have the desire. Otherwise, they would just see it themselves, right? So you're irrelevant. It doesn't matter that, you're trying to show them this. You can't personalize or specify ideas, because anybody can think anything at any time, even contrary things back to back. So it's the human variable that people try to define people very solidly, but you could turn around and change your mind, or you could have two different ideas or things, practices kind of simultaneously. So that's what this one character I had written about was kind of like that. He would be labeled absolutely by countless different things at different times. So at one time he's labeled in one extreme, then the other, not too long after he's labeled some other extreme. So it's like, let me try to say it in a literal sense, like let's say Donald Trump's being criticized for something, and let's say you were to defend him from that criticism. It's like, now you're a MAGA, now you're a Republican, you're this or that. You might have just defended him against some unfair criticism. It doesn't mean you like him or you agree with anything he does or says, but just because you had that, like, oh, Donald Trump is an alien from outer space, and he's, so you defend against that because you just think that's a nonsense point. Then, oh, now you're called a MAGA and this and that. And then you turn around later and you defend, oh, Kamala Harris is accused of something stupid too. She's a Chinese communist asset. And then you defend that. And you say, oh, you're a Democrat. You're a mindless liberal. Right? So this is where objectivity is so difficult to do sometimes, because you might not like either one, but all you're doing is pointing out and countering illogical things, right? So it doesn't mean you're dug in or you even like them or you defend them. It just means that claim, that criticism was irrational, and so you're just debunking that. But it doesn't mean you're dug in or have to associate with that side overall. And so that's sort of my reputation for objectivity in a lot of ways, that I would I care about more the nature of the process than the result. Like, I want it to be a sound process that makes sense and is logical and is based in logic and reason, and then whatever conclusion you come to, whatever outcome you come to as a result of that is fine, right? Will speak for itself, but right, you want to arrive there at a sound process. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be dug in. It doesn't have to be it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be dug in, or it doesn't have to be like you're on one side or the other all the time, absolutely, fully, completely, right? Because you associate with a side doesn't mean you agree with everything they say. Because you aren't part of a side doesn't mean you have to disagree with everything they say. It just means that, like, for example, okay, I voted for Trump in 2024, but doesn't mean that I like him or everything that he does or agree with it. It's more that, right? In fact, the funny thing with the way an absolutist would perceive that is like, it's a small step in the right direction towards self-governance or something bigger, right? So you're trying to break down the two-party state. So not only do you not like him, but you would say in 2028, let's not don't vote for a Republican 2028. Don't vote for, vote for an independent, vote for a unity party member, right? Like Tulsi Gabbard has been ingratiated. So there's much more nuance to it than that, but this is how people perceive it in false duality. Is like, oh, if you must vouch for everything everyone does all the time. It must be, kind of just all one side or all the other. But there's much, much more nuance to it than that. So it didn't seem like a crash so far, but I'm not too happy with the performance of this from yesterday. Right, it really pisses me off, because then again, I'm gonna have to download 50 million VODs and piece that shit together. It's like, but yeah, I should do this on a regular basis. Like, whenever I'm driving, I should just do this. Just because, and then I can do maybe longer sessions of it later on if I get more time. But and the audio quality isn't the greatest, but sometimes I feel like I'm talking too loudly, or I hold it too close. Like, let me try to talk like quieter now a little bit, because I think because I'm driving, I want to try to talk louder to compensate for the sound of the car and stuff. But maybe you don't need to do that. Like, maybe it gets muffled because I talk too loud. Right, I think it's meant to be like that. So yeah, I'm doing it on 480p, which again, I really don't give a shit about that. It's just in principle, it shouldn't be, right? Because again, I'm just talking, I'm not showing anything, or whatever I'm showing would be very basic. But it doesn't matter, because, you know what I mean? I just wanted to, in principle, let's say I was doing it in 1080p and there was some video and it was something more substantial, right? I more so just want to know that it would work to that extent. Yeah, you have the human variable, you have certain things, right? There's certain things like that are condemned that kind of reveal the problem with the contrivance state is that, oh, if people are alone, that makes them crazy, or if people think too much, that's bad. Talk to themselves, be objective, right? All those things are bad, right? Like criticizing thinking, like, oh, that's the issue, don't think too much. That's like saying, oh, if you don't like what you see, just close your eyes, just don't look, just don't pay attention, right? That shouldn't be the issue. That's just a reflection of what is in front of you. So the thing is that right, you can't criticize thinking. You can't criticize, observing something. So whenever it's like an emperor has no clothes fallacy, like, oh, this process is absolute and unquestionable, and if you question it, you're the problem, rather than if it really was absolute, then it should hold up to any questioning or scrutiny. So this is what I call the non-accountable false absolute, right? Is the idea that this process, this society, this contrivance, this thing, this God, this religion, this morality, whatever, right? It's absolute. It's absolute, and just don't question it, right? Because it's absolute. But rather, it's the opposite. It's rather that if any amount of questioning could cause it to be invalidated or not exclusively, not so much that it's a bad thing or you shouldn't do it, but it would be not the absolute that's like, oh, you have to do this one thing only. So what that means is right, like it's sort of a built-in self-fulfilling fallacy, right? This standard is absolute, and anyone who doesn't do it doesn't count, kind of. We're going to label them, oh, this is absolute, but there's no deviation or variance. Nobody else could possibly do anything else or want to do anything else. There can't be anything else that could possibly exist that could be a valid form of decision-making, existence, preference, any lifestyle, nothing. Nothing else can exist. Right, and if it does exist, then that's the problem. The problem isn't the expectation or this empirical basis that says, this is the only one-size-fits-all thing you must do. It's the problem that anything else exists at all, right? So again, it's your fault as the observer or as any variance, anything else that you do, right? So it's a standard that can never be wrong then, right? Like it's absolute, and anybody who questions it, oh, you're the heretic, you're the problem, you're this, you're that, right? You attack, you shoot the messenger, basically. Right, and so you can never be wrong. Anybody who doesn't fit in line with it is themselves wrong. So you sort of dehumanize them, or you try to discredit them, or you try to label them. And so that, again, it's really a hard thing for people to face, because that happens all the time with basically everything, that you attack the individual, the observer, the messenger, but you don't address or hold accountable the process. You say, oh, this can be absolute, this religion or this belief system or this society, this dogma, but it just requires this very specific set of circumstances in which we indoctrinate people when they're young, in which we punish and ostracize critical thinking and questioning, in which we reward compliance and cult-like behavior, in which we create this perfect censor everything that doesn't suit us and bolster everything that does. And if we create this exact perfect environment under that circumstance, now it seems to be absolute. But the fact that it requires that means that, oh, you could do those same things in anything else and make that seem valid too. Just ask dictators, just ask, World War II Germany, just ask China, right? Oh, it makes that seem absolute. In North Korea, it makes that seem good if you just create the exact, perfect, ideal, optimal circumstance where you censor everything else that doesn't fit you, that doesn't suit you. Right? So is that really a credible basis, or is it rather the opposite, that you're bypassing any critical accountability that you would have. So by that same measure, it's arbitrary, and it could be just about anything. And so this was kind of a more disorganized discussion, like it wasn't on one topic per se. And in fact, when I go to upload these, I don't even have to show the screen that I'm doing here. It's more like I could just show my channel art, or I could, do anything with it. Frankly, at this point, I don't even really care, but I just do it just to do it. But I think that's some form of value that you get. Is like if you do something on a routine, right, that can be good, instead of, I tend to be sporadic with it. Yeah, when I go to try to do an episode, it crashes. When I don't do an episode and I do this more just to test it, now it doesn't crash. Like, that's so stupid. There's just so many technical issues with doing this that I kind of give up on even trying to mobile stream, but I don't even really want to do it for long periods of time, right? I just want to be able to do it when I want to, right? Without any issues or having to worry about the crashes and stuff. So I think it did just crash, which is kind of mind-boggling. That means this would theoretically work in like a plane, or like if it might work better even. You're in a plane, you're in a sky, you're in a... Right, so no more airplane mode needed. Just fucking use the Starlink. But I don't know what happened with this. It's still saying 44 minutes, so maybe sometimes it's not even a crash here. It's my player crashing on the phone that I'm watching it on, like on my other phone, but it doesn't matter because whatever, that phone's just crappy and maybe can't handle doing that, but it's just very, very annoying to have to deal with that. I never realized it was that crazy to IRL stream. And again, you're not even showing shit on camera or on video or really anything meaningful on the screen. You're more so just, again, I'm just doing that as a placeholder to show something, but yeah, this is my copyrighted debate format content. Technically, it's just so obscure that nobody knows what I'm talking about that, it's kind of hard to do that.